Okay. Action. Welcome to Drupal Front-End Development with Pattern Lab. This has been a really cool tool, and I've been using it now for probably like 6 to 8 months, and it has been a really good learning experience. I have found a nice marriage between some of your typical fundamentals when it comes to development in general, like you're going to redesign a site, or you're going to create kind of a consistent base theme for several other sites. And Pattern Lab has done all of that stuff, but it's been able to kind of bake in some additional features that we're starting to take advantage of where I work at NCEI here in Nashville. So I have to have a disclaimer. I'm not an expert. I have, like I said, I have been spending 6 to 8 months working on kind of our Pattern Lab implementation, but we haven't deployed it to production yet. And I'm still learning some nuances that I wish I may have learned ahead of time. So maybe I can share those with y'all, and if you're interested in taking on your own Pattern Lab project, maybe we can help curveball around those. So yeah, I'm still learning these new methods and techniques. So now that I got my disclaimer out of the way, let's jump into the theory, the deep now. Pattern Lab all kind of like revolves around this atomic design methodology. And a lot of people have their own kind of analogies, and over the months, I've heard people kind of explain this in groups and other camps and cons. And I kind of came up with my own. And I started to imagine kind of a sandwich shop, and how, when we look at, how a sandwich shop maybe runs efficiently, generally they're going to prepare items ahead of time, your toppings. They're going to, inspect them before they actually start to use them, while they're preparing the food. And, when you have someone doing that, it's essentially you're improving your efficiency, consistency, thus, improving like your overall product. And, atomic design is very similar. And they share the same kind of methodologies, at least is how I look at it. And, when you look at it at a component level, you've got several different components. Say of an Italian sub, you've got your bread, your meat, your toppings, and then maybe the dressing to kind of like kick it off. So when you add all these things together, typically you're going to have a very, you have a damn good sandwich. And so when we really look at the atomic terminology here, we've got atoms, molecules, and organisms. And when we compare this to the sandwich analogy that I was just talking about, we've got atoms as the basic building blocks of all of our matter. These are the individual slices of our meats that we're going to put on our sandwich. And the molecules, we're going to look at maybe more of a grouping. Maybe you take those 3 different types of meats and put them together, and intended to go on the sandwich. When you look at your organisms, it's more of like we take these combined molecules and make them whole. And when we look at them in more of a when we apply that to, say, web development, we can maybe look at atoms as like text, links, form inputs. And then molecules are more along the lines of blocks and forms, navigations, more put together pieces of atoms. And organisms would be, your heroes, or, a whole section of a page or a card, for example. Header and footer, obviously, is a good one to throw in there. But the real takeaway is that when you can build it in such a way where it's agnostic, you're able to kind of apply these to say multiple websites, maybe integrate it with different technologies, and it just allows you to be more front-end efficient. And it also works really well with, say, you have a client, and you're able to, when you're going through your typical phases of design, prototype, develop, and then sail away, you have like, sometimes part of that process can be broken because you're not able to get one-on-one with the client. Maybe you're spending too much time on like prototyping. You're focused on the Drupal side of things before the client has even really signed off on the actual functionality. And the more complex your site is going to be, the more important it is to focus on that functionality. Anybody can look at a mock-up and say, well, that looks great. But once you start to, say, size it down, or you start really exploring how it works, you start to notice these, basically these things, and then you're able to, maybe focus on those so you can fix them or go back to the drawing board on certain items. And to me, I feel like that has been a big miss with our team. We didn't, in our previous experience with a redesign, we had a lot of promise up front, a lot of mock-up, a lot of design, and then it was just shipped off to the developer for 6 to 8 months, and then when it came back, it wasn't quite, then we were able to evaluate the functionality, evaluate how it was working. So to me, that was a really broken system. And Pattern Lab kind of filled that void because it allowed us to take that mock-up, break it down into pieces, demo them out, get them kind of signed off, and then ship it off into Drupal world where majority of the time took typically. So how do we make all that easy? Well, Pattern Lab has kind of been the answer for us in that it's opened this door for smoothing out this process. So in the description, I kind of talked about, like, at its core what Pattern Lab is, and it essentially is a static site generator. You can either have it powered by PHP or Node, but essentially it will just stitch together these different components into an end product. And the amazing thing about this is that some may say, well, yeah, I can prototype a site and have a client sign off on that, but can you take that prototype and reuse most of its components? Can you use more than maybe just copying and pasting some of the markup? Pattern Lab actually can integrate into your Drupal theme, and you can connect to those templates and continue this process of a more fundamental approach to web development. So I was going to demo Pattern Lab real quick. So this is a This is like a demo site on their website, and so once you install this framework, typically it's more vanilla than this. This is just kind of to show, how these pieces can kind of come together. And what we're looking at right now is the all page, and this is all patterns, components, either small or big, kind of dumped out here onto the page. Yeah. That better? So one thing that I kind of failed to mention is, as you're looking through this, is that, ultimately this is a style guide. Something that a lot of larger businesses maybe, they lack having something like this to hand off to future developers or anything to kind of keep their brand consistent. And brand is very valuable, and you want to hold on to that. So just kind of showing a few examples here. So we've got maybe some different headings. It's almost like you're looking at like a front-end framework, like Bootstrap or something in their documentation. So as we're scrolling, you know that things are kind of coming together, things are kind of building. This is kind of on the back end. This is what's happening. They're taking these smaller components and forming them into what they're ultimately going to be, piece by piece or stage by stage. So I'll just keep scrolling here. You'll see it get more and more advanced. Maybe what we'll do is just kind of jump right into some of these. So through this menu is based on your directory structure. So the typical setup is referring to them as atoms, molecules, and organisms. But you also have, when you start looking at it from a web perspective, you're going to have templates and pages. And these are more of like collective, parts of Pattern Lab, where you start piecing all these things kind of together to build out an actual product. If we look at, say, like a button pattern, at its essence here is the button pattern. And through Pattern Lab, you can actually look and view more information. You can kind of see, what the markup looks like. Say, this is obviously before the rendering engine has, been able to process this. The output would be something a little bit more like this here. And we get kind of deeper in here. Maybe we look at a form, like a search field. Let's look at a figure with a caption. Let's look at footer, maybe. Yeah. So each thing you see here is kind of a piece that can be put together, when joined together, you have something that could be used on, say, like your home page. This is a collection of all the different components kind of built together, or constructed together. And then as you move more into, say, the pages kind of section, you start to really see it kind of come to life, and you see different images. And so Pattern Lab basically gives you the tools to create something like this. And you could create a page for each within your site to demo with your client, and maybe demonstrate how much time you put in to say this. Well, this is how this is how responsive it is. This is how you would expect to look at, say, on a mobile device of some sort. Maybe here's how the menu works. So the idea is really to bring it to life before you start focusing on development. So Pattern Lab has two kind of sides to it. You could stick to its core, which is based on PHP, and with that derived, say, Node as a base. So essentially you could choose PHP or Node to manage how Pattern Lab constructs your components and builds them on the fly.
So like on the command line, you can use PHP to run the build process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so you have different editions. So you can use a Mustache engine if you were doing some templating that way. Twig. There's actually a Drupal edition. Um, and on the node side, these are really wrappers. They just kick off different pattern jobs. Pattern Lab node is like an npm package that you would download, and your files would actually reference that package. And the wrappers available are gulp and grunt. Something really to note on this, though, is that there's no full support for Twig. You cannot actually do inline templating. That's where you're passing variables with the width through the width method, I guess.
What method is that?
Have you used,
Like
so like if you're
including
if you're including a component and you were going to pass in variables and you're actually defining them right there, that's typically how you use width. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So
is the Drupal version Drupal 7 or 8?
So it's agnostic, so it could work for any version. However, I mean, if you're going to do, well, let me back up there, because actually it's Twig or Mustache based. You would have to integrate that into a Drupal 7 or site. So you'd have to change this Drupal 7's templating engine through your theme. But I think it's getting most traction for Drupal 8 because of how Twig is already built into 8.
Yeah, so you would use the Twig edition or the Drupal edition, but I guess if the Drupal edition is going Twig based.
The Drupal edition and the Twig edition, there's not that many differences. I don't know why they offer them side by side like that. I guess some people may look at Twig as like, well, Twig could be used for anything, a symphony project. And the Drupal edition is really just, it actually adds some of the Drupal-based Twig functions that you'd find, like T-method and filtering, things that you might be used to in Drupal. So I'm maybe gonna walk through these slides here a little bit. What I've done right now is I've created a Drupal theme, Drupal 8 theme, and this is the repository that I put it on. Thought maybe we would kind of walk through some of these steps as far as like setting up a Pattern Lab instance inside your theme. But what we can do is look at the build tools that are used here. So back out here. So there are a few requirements to this particular instance, and on the back end we use so Composer is obviously used for Drupal, and we're actually using a little mesh between the PHP version of Pattern Lab and some of the Node version actually. So this kind of, because this is still pretty experimental. I mean, Pattern Lab hasn't been around for that long, and it's kind of it's just constantly changing. And even on their website, they actually refer to, they suggest creating your own instance and kind of like bringing the tools together that you need, or that you maybe feel comfortable working with. Out of the box, the PHP version uses PHP, your local version of it. This is their website here. And this is kind of a good graphic to see kind of how maybe pieces come together. And they kind of talk a lot about what I've already mentioned here. And from the download page, you can kind of see the different editions that I talked about and the different node versions. They have a decent documentation here. I think it's, in some areas it could be improved. You know, I find myself Googling quite a bit. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, you know, this is a marriage of several different technologies, and, you know, it's not their responsibility to tell you how to teach you how Twig works necessarily, you know, so something to keep in mind. But this works. There's definitely a decent amount of stuff here. So typically to download, if you go to the Pattern Lab GitHub page, you see the several different versions of it. You've got the PHP core version. Here's an engine for Twig. You have the Pattern Lab node version. But it might honestly just be easiest to just come from the download side, choose which one you're after. If we were going to go to Drupal edition here, these are our assets, and a little bit of a README to kind of walk you through setting it up. So what we've had to do is, you know, when you're building a theme, there's a lot of front-end magic that kind of comes together. You're working with, you know, fairly new technologies as far as like, you know, SAS and other type of build tools like minification, maybe linting, or, you know, when you have a Pattern Lab instance like this and everything is kind of broken up into their own directories, kind of like what you saw in the demonstration there, you have to have some way to kind of glob for all those CSS files, and, you know, when you're componentizing, be able to pull all those together into one overarching instance. So and in this particular marriage, I chose Grunt just for the simple fact that I've worked with it before and I felt kind of comfortable with it. So I guess let's dive into the theme here. So if I were to clone this down, I'm just going to kind of skip that process and jump right to it. That is really small to see. A little bit better. So nothing fancy here. You just have your basic Drupal 8 theme files, such as your info and your libraries. Excuse me. I have a grunt file here, which basically manages all of my grunt tasks. If I didn't explain that well enough, like, does anybody have questions on that?
I'm interested to know, before we dig in, how much work and what work did it take for you to get to this right here?
To this particular moment?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Did you write the grunt file yourself, or did it come with part of?
So I've kind of picked a few things. So if we look back here at, say, so there's a grunt edition here, and what I would, inside here, there's a grunt file. So this was kind of like the underlying framework that I used to kind of piece together, say, how I had this set up. This all relies on the Node version, in which I mentioned earlier that it does not work with some renderings of Twig, like inline. But for the most part, some of these tasks here, as far as like globbing for all the assets and kind of bringing them down into one, some of your other types of tasks, like watching for changes, and Pattern Lab is kind of that thing where as you're making changes and you're saving files, it's typically recompiling those on the back end. And it actually produces a public folder. And your public folder is basically where all the output goes. So the reason why there's a copy task here, for example, is that it has to get from your source directory, which is where all your development is happening, and then move to a public directory where it is then, you're able to access it on the browser side. This is loaded with several different tasks. I'm not sure if you're familiar, maybe with browser sync. It's a task that kind of just looks for, say, if you have a change, and it refreshes your browser for you, so you don't have to, toggling back and forth.
So when you cloned this to start your project, did you clone this repo or did you npm install Pattern Lab run?
I believe I cloned it. This page is a little outdated. I believe I cloned it, and then I ran the npm install command, and that gathered all the, the Pattern Lab node package, as well as all the dev dependencies that that are attached to this particular project. Okay. So, long story short, I got kind of a project up and running, and then started having these errors about how Twig, how certain function of Twig didn't work. So I had to kind of roll back the Twig engine of that, and it was kind of like this marriage of PHP version with a Node wrapper around it. That sounds really kind of complex all of a sudden, but it's very, I don't know. I've also spent some time into this, so it's like I was able to kind of, deduce a path forward or something. But what we could do is maybe walk through. Okay, let's just do this. Small.
Using the Zoom.
Yeah.
No, it's fine.
Can you do that? Control
Resize. No.
You change the screen resolution.
Screen resolution doesn't work. This is a Ubuntu computer, and it's very.
Does it look okay on your screen?
It looks better. It's still kind of small, but it's clear.
Yeah, the resolution is not.
Yeah, I think that was definitely making this part of the problem. Okay. So if I were to if I had a Drupal 8 instance, and I went into my themes folder, and let's say I were to clone this down. I'm going to clone this down into a new theme directory here. And if I went in here, and let's just blow away this components directory. Okay, so this is just, all this is really is just a couple of, it's a grunt file with a package file. And in there, there's a list of some of the dev dependencies that we have for this. Some of them that I talked about. And other than that, that's it. We're pulling a bootstrap to kind of give ourselves kind of this underlying framework here. So that said, this is pretty much a pretty vanilla D8 theme. So now if I were to say install Pattern Lab, the Drupal version, here's the edition, the standard PHP Drupal edition. I guess I could have gone through the Pattern Lab website. So this tells me first time install, we're going to use Composer. It's going to create a project. It's basically just referencing this starter kit. And so if we were to copy this here, and I come back to my theme, insert it, and then say I give it a folder name. The typical convention is, you could call it Pattern Lab, or you could call it Components. Components here. So this is just going to grab Pattern Lab and install this Drupal standard edition on here.
So you just clone the grunt version, and then you also clone the PHP version. Do you have to have both?
You don't have to have both. You can use you could just use the PHP version. I found it more helpful to have a marriage between the two, because typically when I work front-end development, I like relying on different utilities and other kind of frameworks to kind of ease that process for me. Like, for example, the PHP version, can only get you so far, basically. When you're working on a large project, you kind of need both ends, especially for modern day front end development. So this is basically just asking. It's downloaded this Drupal version, and it's installing a Drupal starter kit, which is just basically filling in these twig components. Those ones that I was saying, like the filters and functions that Drupal recognizes. And then it asked me if I want to add on an additional starter kit. There's a couple out there. Say like Drupal Minimal, it could maybe get you started with a couple patterns. It'll show you how maybe the layout works. Whereas if you start just bare bones or vanilla, it's going to give you, a very kind of empty shell. So,
Yeah, Drupal Minimal, Drupal Theme, Drupal. What's the bottom one?
Gesso.
Okay.
I think this is a third party, like Forum One here. Just created this one. I believe that's what is above it. But the two top ones, those are part of pattern line project. So after it's installed, we have a components directory, and if we go in there, this is pretty much our vanilla install. We can look at some of this code here. It's taking a minute to open. Okay. I think my machine is freezing.
Live demo.
Come on. Crap.
Seems so simple.
Maybe kill Adam. At Tom.
Adam didn't have anything to do with it.
What is the do command? It's like
Kill all?
Kill. It's X something stop. Tells you how to.
Yes, that should be it. Run the process. I'll do
Get rid of Slack here. That's
yes, space dash EDF.
Say that again.
Yes, space dash EDF. Yeah,
Maybe grab for that.
yeah, might grab that.
Okay.
And kill that process ID number. You can use kill-9 for process ID, and then that ID number to force the kill.
Any of these looking apparent? I'm not sure what's going on here.
Well, that first one.
This one here. Is this the ID?
They yeah, you can.
Get rid of it.
Kill all.
I don't want to kill the browser or the Google Hangout.
Well, I mean, like kill all Adam.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I think there's one you can do it by name.
Is Adam the culprit?
I don't know. I rarely see this. I think maybe the Hangouts might be the culprit here. Okay. This isn't good.
But
I was going to look at this code here. This is what we used Composer to download here, and
yeah. Just look at it there.
so, like I said, you have your source directory and your public directory. Your public directory is what's created once you generate your first round of patterns. And you have different configuration files and patterns cores stored in here as well. But source directory is typically where you're only going to be working from. So there's a few things here to kind of note. The twig components, obviously, this is with the Drupal edition. So you can kind of come in here and you would see, say, some different filters like T filter here. And then by referencing this twig components directory, you're able to add maybe Drupal filters and functions and things inside your patterns. So we can kind of go over some of these annotations. This is really allows you to add, say, comments on your different patterns. If you wanted to have, some sort of additional information to a user, there is a kind of a global data JSON file, and this allows you. These are basically defined variables. They're very generic, say like URL or a title, an author, name. Maybe you create like a summary variable, and it has different things, images, things like that. You're able to. These are at a global level, so you can use these in any of your patterns, and as you're rendering pattern lab, it'll actually pull in this content. So having these values are pretty handy sometimes. Layouts I don't use. I'm not really sure what that is. I think that maybe refers to maybe something more core. Macros, you can store different twig macros in here, like generating menus and things like that. There's a meta directory. This is where your header and footer live, and this is basically just your basic header calls. It's already set up to call in the CSS files in addition to any like Pattern Lab specific items that you've added. Same with the footer, pretty basic. I've actually added in these additional scripts here for the project. Then you get into the patterns here. So when we were originally kind of walking through some of the terminology, we were looking at atoms, molecules, and organisms. But what I've noticed that is kind of a trend now is that, if you're really using this inside a say Drupal specific project, maybe you want to call it something a little bit more related to web development in general. So you maybe look at it as like your base items. These would be, say, your project's color scheme. Part of this is really you're trying to create a style guide for your site in addition to build these patterns. So you'll see in some cases here, you just you're writing some basic code to kind of loop through various different colors so you can have them render on the screen. I guess I could call this up if I feel like that's jumping ahead a little bit. I'm sorry. So one thing to note with your patterns, they'll typically have 3 files. You'll have your, just with any type of, component building, you're going to have typically a SAS file, a twig file, and a YAML file, or a JSON. YAML and JSON are kind of interchangeable. Pattern Lab will, I guess, look for a JSON file first. If it doesn't find it, it will then look for a YAML file. One gotcha is that you cannot use the YAML extension. It has to be the YML. Not really sure why there, but or if that's been fixed. That was a bug a while back.
Sounds like experience.
Yeah, yeah. So, and inside your component, you can have, your markup and or your styling there. I already talked about the twig file. This is where you're going to put some additional markup. These are very base templates. These are really or base patterns, just to really demonstrate. These are really style guide specific, I should say. So this is kind of a basic YAML file. You have your colors array, and inside there you have a color set array, and then these dashes here, these represent I guess array sets.
It's an item in the array.
An item in the array, yes. You'd have inside this first color set, you'd have some variables defined here: a swatch, a style variable.
JS script file. What is this?
This is a YAML file.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So when you have all three of these files together, Pattern Lab can generate an end result from it. It can take the twig file and pipe in all the data from the YAML file and then style it with your styles attached to it. So when you think of it as like, if you can visualize how this would be in your project, I mean, everything would be very neat and tidy. Each component on your site would have its own, style file, its own template file.
So like H1 would have its own
Right.
component. H2 would be its own component.
Well, it could
You
be.
want it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it could be. From experience, what I've noticed is that the more templates you have, the more memory is required, and it starts to kind of, eat up your resources. And right now, a project that I'm working on, we have so many templates. It's taking about 30 seconds just to compile fully. That's compile and then move everything into the public directory. So here are some components, and these are, I try to be very, clear with what some of these are. So you've got, say a button, a button pattern. Inside here, this is the markup that you would see, or typical markup. Just some kind of dummy text to demonstrate what this pattern is. Obviously our styles here, we're relying on the framework to style our button here, so there's no styles. But if I wanted to add something maybe specific to the theme, change a hover state or something like that, I put that information inside this file.
So you only need to include within the components stats file stuff that is specific to that.
It's different
And then it
from
uses the
default.
rest of the global.
Yep. I mean, really how it all kind of comes together is that all these SAS files are, collected and made into one. So you could have inherited styles. It's not that it protects it necessarily. Okay, let's. So this is kind of the rundown of what some of these templates look like. Some are obviously a little bit more complex than others, and Atom not working is kind of throwing me off here. Let's look at.
I'm gonna try to kill all item once, just in case. It works.
Kill all.
One word. Kill all is one word.
Like that?
Yeah.
All the times I opened it. Okay. Hey. So what we were looking at were all the different patterns inside of our source directory, which is inside of our components directory. And we can look at maybe like a footer, very basic items here. Just pretty generic markup, basically. So when we have these patterns, we have to look at, some way of compiling them. And since we have a PHP core version, we could just as easily come into, let's go into this new one that we downloaded. You could essentially run this Oh, I forgot to. So we have to run composer install, I believe.
We need a .forward selection from.
Oh, I think what's happening is that I'm trying to generate and there's nothing in there. I think that's what it's kind of saying. Make sure you have a starter kit or that you have patterns. Okay, so that's part of the problem. Where were we? We were just kind of talking about different, like what these patterns look like. So if we look at the instance that maybe I'm using now, so I'm using a grunt wrapper to kind of handle, calling that particular command to generate the patterns. I'm looking for all the CSS files inside these patterns here and kind of globbing them and pulling them together. And this is basically just the grunt file that I took from the web. I just added some additional things. I gave the ability to run a shell command. So this way I can create a task that just runs a shell command for me, which is basically just generating pattern lab on its own. I have some globbing techniques to kind of grab all those CSS files. It compiles it down into one CSS file. And when you have different libraries or a framework that you need to pull in, I'm using Uglify to grab those files as well and consolidate them into one library file for me. And then this is the copy task. This was part of the original here. This actually takes all the patterns and CSS, things that have been compiled, and dumps them into the public directory. And then we kind of already talked about these paths here, or these particular tasks, like watching for changes and syncing your browser to what's been created. So what I've created here too is this is a this is really a starter kit to some extent. Go back to the example, and So kick off the basic grunt command. I have that listed here. It's going to generate patterns, run through all the different tasks. Basically, here's a list. It's going to glob for everything. It's going to compile the SAS and grab all the JavaScript there. Well, that's helpful, but I don't really have any way of accessing it. So Node also handles the local host server for me. I can run that by typing this command serve, which basically uses browser sync as the local server. You see it compile everything, and then it kicks open my local host window here. And then this is that all page again that has all the basic patterns. So I have all these different components that I've added ahead of time here for demonstration. I'm using a Bootstrap framework just to kind of clean it up a little bit. But if we look at, say, kind of our end product here, these are just various patterns that I've constructed onto a page. And if we look at, let's get into so we know how our patterns are as far as like we have a card pattern, things like that. So a lot of this is based off of inheritance. So if you look at, say, like a header, for example, our header is going to have our menu. And with Pattern Lab, we can actually use these little short, kind of short code in a way. This is a way to include, say, our main navigation component. It looks inside. This is like the top level directory inside the patterns directories, and this would be, say, the second level. So if you look inside components, main nav, we see that there's a twig pattern there, and this is basically just, you know, some basic header here. Several different chains of inheritance here. You know, I'm pulling in like a site name and
So in the terminology, would you say the header's an organism, or is it not that clean like that?
the header is an organism. It is
Organism or
Molecule.
I'd consider it an
Okay.
organism because your header is typically, it's a global item. It's typically made up of, say, a menu or, you know, some sort of search function, your site branding. All of those items together, to me, would define as a So base would be your atoms, components would be your molecules, layouts would be your organisms. Layouts here, I just have a set.
You're still sharing your screen.
it has to be because we're watching.
Yeah, that's true. This is weird because I don't see it on the live stream.
But aren't we watching? Hang up.
Watching.
Okay, now I see the screen.
I think there's a little bit of a lag there.
Okay. I see. This is what I see.
There it comes,
There it goes. Okay.
which is a way back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Slowly.
yeah. So I was talking about atoms are referred to as base, molecules are referred to as components, and our organisms are referred to as our layouts. And our basic footer, header, and kind of a main content area. And inside each one of these content areas, I've created these blocks. These are twig blocks. The markup on the outside there is really, it's going to translate into Drupal is what I want it to be. But inside the block usually is going to rely on, if I'm looking at it from a pattern line perspective, the block is going to contain some sort of other pattern that it's including, or maybe some additional markup that I need for demonstrating. The whole point of the block is that when I start to pull these patterns in, I can override those blocks and pipe in the actual Drupal data. This would be content from the render array, basically. So in this very basic example right here, this is our header, and I'm including a main navigation component. If we looked at the main navigation here, we have all this markup that we're using, but we know that the navigation, Drupal is going to handle that. So we've created this content block, and from pattern line, we should be able to see how this stuff's being generated. So this is the data that I've added that's associated with the main navigation. And just looking at the template file, this is just a basic twig loop. It's coming through and generating this markup for us to kind of emulate our navigation menu up here. If I were to kind of focus on that, I could come to our layouts and choose the header here. So if we look at the info, I can also, it's kind of an open view into maybe what the editor provides, but I can actually see the markup here too, which is helpful. So as I'm building this out, I'm kind of, by using blocks and kind of piping in my own data, I'm creating this themable shell, or this really pluggable shell of a template. So if this is, say, my prototype, and this is what I'm demoing to a client, here's what we have. Are you happy with this? This functionality is down. If they sign off on this kind of thing, then it would be like, all right, well, now we start looking at integrating this into Drupal. Have any questions on that before I start diving in how maybe I would start pulling in these templates and piping Drupal data into it? I'll get it started here. So,
not really a question, unless I'm wrong. But basically, the whole terminology around atoms, molecules, patterns is really flexible. Like, you just chose to call yours something different because you wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't mean to confuse anybody. I was just trying to show, I guess I was trying to demonstrate that, yeah, you could. It's all up to you. Whatever directories that live inside the patterns directory here, for example, we'll just create one. New folder. We'll call this 5, I don't know, sub items or something. And so we have our watch task running. Here's kind of a learned tidbit, is that sometimes the watch tasks in between, depending on maybe what kind of person or developer you are, you're constantly maybe saving as you're walking through. Well, the jobs try to run every time there's a save. So if you're saving in between while the job is actually running, it's not going to actually regenerate. That makes sense. It's already generating. So what I typically do is I'll have two windows open. One window to kick off, say, just a simple build command. I'm thinking that now you see sub items up here. There's nothing in there. I don't have any patterns yet, but you could really construct this however you wanted to. Make this work for whatever team you're working on.
Okay.
So going back to we have a working pattern lab theme. It's been we've created our patterns. Well, I talked about the layouts. I didn't say our template. This would be our single page template. All this really is doing is including, the top level items, the header, the main, and the footer. Inside each one of those templates, they include their own set of patterns. So it's kind of like this trickle down effect. All the way up until we get to, say, a page, which is literally just including, say, a template. Or, in this case, it's a home page. Maybe it's just a regular page template. So now that you see kind of like the top level and how maybe it trickles down. So what would you do with a Drupal theme now if you wanted to, say, take this theme and make it look like our pattern lab instance? Well, first off, we can kind of localize some of these items. We have a header, a main, and a footer. So in theory, if we override each one of those templates, we can, using some different modules, we can tell Drupal where to find those templates, or we can localize those templates. We have a couple helpers, and those helpers are Drupal components. This helps us integrate our patterns, allows us to kind of namespace where those twig patterns live. So we have to tell Drupal that our patterns live inside, components, source, and whatever the structure is. In addition, we use things like twig tweak to help us. Twig tweak allows us to embed whole blocks. It really treats things like, an entity, and that you can, pull in a view block or just a regular block, and actually embed that inside your twig template. And then we're also going to use a twig field value. This just makes it easier to pull that value out, whether it be sanitized or raw. Are any of these new to y'all, or you guys know what these are?
The only one I know is twig tweak.
Okay.
Component seems to be important to what you're going to do.
Yeah. So
Okay.
This is the big one. And it allows you to add, some twig namespacing. So if we look back at our theme folder, I have these installed already. So those three modules. So if I come back to my vanilla theme here and I look inside info, I can define a new setting, an array set of settings, I guess. And it's called component-libraries. Inside here, I've told it to create a namespace for my base, my components, my layouts, templates, pages. And then I specify where that path, leads them to. So now what I've done is that if I were to say, I can now include or extend a twig template that actually lives outside of or deeper inside the theme itself. So now that I have these defined here, we'll maybe look at some of our Drupal templates. So I've kind of already started to build some of these together. We've got our blocks, a content section, a layout, and a navigation section. So some of our vanilla templates would be, say, our HTML here, page, and we have our region. You know, if you were, I guess, basing your theme off of something, this stuff would already be inherited, but this is not a base theme. So going back to, looking at our theme here, we have our obvious regions, our header, our middle content, and then our footer. So what we maybe start with is the header. So using wonderful Twig debug or theme debug, we're able to kind of find out how these regions are kind of put together. And if we look inside this general area here, we have our region for our menu, and a region for our primary menu. So these are just basically just using region.html.twig. You can see that because of the little star next to it. And these are some of my theming suggestions that have already been, that are being provided to me. So if I wanted to take care of region header, which would be kind of like, I guess it'd be the overarching right here. And if I wanted to alter this markup, I come in here to my layout section, and I would copy this region.html.twig. And since we've created our markup in Pattern Lab already, now what we need to do is we need to extend our template and then override the blocks that we've created. And inside that block, that's where we're going to pipe in the Drupal specific content. Here's my template that I've created.
Which template is this?
This is region header.html. So now that I've done that, so let's look at, notice how I'm using this @ symbol. This is referring to my namespace that I created in the previous step of setting up the components. So now whenever I use this @layouts, it's going to reference the components directory, the source directory, into the layouts directory, and then here I'm whittling down into the actual template that I'm using. So really it's saving me a lot of typing as well. So we can look at what that header template, just to remember, inside layouts, header. So here's just some basic markup. Here's the block that I created that's going to pull in Pattern Lab here. But what I could do is I could override this block and pipe in actual Drupal data. So, which is what we're doing right here. We're extending this template and we're overriding this header block. So if I clear my Drupal cache, Page here. Right one.
Your custom thing looks like Bartek.
Nope.
Okay. I was wondering.
My bad. That's a good call.
Thanks.
I was like, what? I was leaving a bar tick on there just so you could see, like.
Yeah, I didn't know if you had some.
I skipped that step. All right, so here's my theme. I'm going to set it as my default, install it. Come on.
I've messed around too much.
Its hero is not defined. I think maybe this. See, I built this and I tried to kind of break it apart so I could walk through some of these steps. So
We did it.
yeah, broken.
I could see like that empty directory we created being a problem. Just knowing that we compile.
Unable to find that template. Skip a step here. Components, component source. Let's see. So I can't find the hero template. So that must be what this is referring to. Let me just comment this out. Well, this template isn't even being used. Unless it's calling header. If I look inside header, I'm just overriding that block. So it should be.
What was the last file you were on? It's like
It's really small.
It's not. I mean,
And
it's small.
not so small. It's not the small. It's the pixelated.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
Yeah.
how do you have the last file that you
Okay.
had that you included?
It's unable to find it when there's the.
Yeah, but this isn't
Yeah.
even being.
Oh, that's okay.
I added these here to kind of like break this up. These should all just be default patterns or default templates.
The comments that you put in, they're not showing up in the comment syntax. Is
It's the
that
Drupal component module enabled.
Jonathan is like the king of problems.
You're on it, yes.
Just step by step. You tell me the steps and I'll make sure you're following them.
Already enabled.
Okay.
All those modules should be in. I didn't disable any modules.
Isn't that weird though, how that doesn't
It's
show
not
right?
coloring, it's not. That's one way to comment it out.
Yeah.
What's that command you're doing?
Watchdog -show. WD -show. Show.
I thought it was white screen of death.
Yeah, that's close enough.
That's why you would use this command.
Exactly. So components hero.twig is not defined inside the registry. Let me clear the registry. How do you, let's see, Drush. Cache rebuild did all of that.
Should. These paths need to be relevant with a dot slashing at the beginning, or is that?
No. Just wondering, what did I? Maybe. Let's see.
Microphone muted.
No, that's.
What the heck?
You just search for anything that might be including that component. See if it's being included. And just get rid of that.
What's the answer?
It's like, yeah, it doesn't look right. Does it?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a weird one.
Yeah.
Set pixelization.
Let's see. All this should be doing is just grabbing the markup from the header and then overriding that block with whatever the content that Drupal is spitting out. There's nothing in that header other than, you know, this markup and this markup.
What you're showing makes sense. We're just missing some
Yeah.
glue.
What I could try to do is bring all of these templates back into play and then just go over them one by one. I wonder if it's still getting picked up even though I have these lines.
That's not.
Right. That might be the case.
What is it?
You tried to exclude a folder with double underscores at the front, but maybe that doesn't exclude it.
Let's try this. If I bring all these back.
The one time I played with Pattern Lab, I had a weird folder name issue.
Okay. Those are all. Make sure I didn't comment anything out in here. Oh, I wonder if it could be that other theme that I installed
That's what I was wondering.
next to it.
Maybe we broke it with our exporting earlier.
I must have. Let's
Delete
delete
that
that.
other thing and delete that empty folder we made too, where we didn't actually put it in.
5.
About
So-
that, yeah.
Sub add or sub art sub something.
That was it.
What was
Hey.
it?
One of those first things we did?
Well, you did all that.
It was no, it was the that theme.
Having two of the same thing?
Yeah, it was. I don't know.
We'll probably have the same theme name.
It was somehow adding it to the registry, even though I hadn't even enabled it. Oh, you know why? Because it had the same theme name.
All the details inside of the theme info file
Were exactly the same, yeah. Okay. So, figure that out.
Maybe don't have me at our next presentation. I'm like, stop doing. Okay.
No, it's fine.
We're here to learn.
Exactly.
If everything went perfectly smoothly, we would learn near as much.
It's true. I mean, I did learn something through that.
Okay. Right, so now we have a bunch of stuff here.
So you're going to walk us back through including these one at a time? So
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So this is just the vanilla theme. It's pulling in the Bootstrap library, but nothing is being really themed here. I've got my menu, just some basic stuff, and I'm using a view to render out article types, and this is the one article type that's there. So, and this is just the teaser view. So, coming back here. Didn't quite get to the featured section, but what I did get to was say, like, if you had an article here, and then we had a navigation, and then some sort of revised footer. So if we were to try to put that together, we go about, say, using theme debug. We found our region, and what we're doing is, so now we can see that we are using region -- header.html.com. This is what theme debug's output was. So we come in here. It's all it's doing is extending. It's overriding the block. When we look, we can see that here's the markup from our twig template inside our component there. But alas, all it's doing is just dumping out the menu that Drupal knows how to dump out. But to fix that, we have to add our kind of Bootstrap specific theming. So in order to do that, we have to override the main menu navigation, and just all I'm doing is kind of a copy and paste of the menus macro. Or menu links macro, and I'm just adjusting some of these styles to be, Bootstrap specific. So if I go ahead and add this, if we look at our menu here, we have a block, a menu block. Right here, we're using block system menu block. So if I were to overwrite this and say, give me the main block, -- main, I can come in here and I would copy our basic block template. I would give it the name that ThemeDebug told us to use. And once in place, I want to call in my main nav that I've already wrote the markup for. So if I call that in, let's ignore this for right now. I call that in, and then I overwrite the content, and I just pipe in what Drupal's content is going to be. What I should see is basically all this markup, this nav, this little hamburger menu that Bootstrap creates. So let's kick that off.
That second section really wants it.
Oh, because I have to override the site branding, even if I don't type anything in there just yet.
So nav main has 2 blocks.
It does.
Okay.
So this was kind of tricky because I was trying to come up with a demo that utilized, like branding and the main navigation up in the header. And the way that Bootstrap's markup is, that's how that's kind of connected like that. So I had to create 2 blocks inside the main navigation template. That should work now. Okay. So there's our main nav as Bootstrap would kind of have it. It obviously is not set up correctly because these aren't themed right. We're still getting the classes and styles applied. That are the generic styles of the menu rendering. So in order to fix that, that's when we look at overriding our main menu macro so we can adjust these classes here. So let's just remove that. This is just that menu macro that I pulled over from, I don't know, some system theme. Right, so with this, all we're looking for is this nav bar right thing. So shift the menu over to the right. Let's rebuild the cache. Now we've refreshed, and now the menu is on the right-hand side. So we're on our way there. So beforehand, Drupal does not want to display your site branding and your navigation in the same template. So what we have to do is inside of our block layout here, I've created several regions: header, breadcrumb, help, etc. I've also created a disable region, and this is kind of that trick, right? This is that trick where you can create blocks, but then you put them in a disabled region and you just never render the region. But it's enabled, so you're able to, say, inject that block somewhere with the site. So to embed a block, remember I was talking a little bit earlier about that module called Twig Tweak. That allows us to do just that. Gives us a twig method, and we pass in the block machine name, and it will magically embed the block in there.
And the reason you're having to do all this is because Bootstrap is set up to where
For
the
that
branding
reason,
is
yeah.
inside of the navigation.
But it's a good challenge because it's
Sure.
a real world challenge of like, everybody likes to use Bootstrap, and it's like, man, how would you do that? So here's my site branding block, and if I look at it, all it is just outputting the name. It's enabled, but it's in my disabled region here.
That's funny because Drupal just removed the disable region from core like 2 versions ago. Like,
oh, really?
yeah, it's just funny that you could just add it back and keep going.
Yeah.
With it.
I mean, if if you're used to that, I mean, I wouldn't abuse this. I don't even know if I'd really use it, but for quick bootstrapping, so here's a machine name. I can grab this from that. So, like I said, it's enabled, but it's not being rendered out. So, what I can do is I can come back to that system block here, or that system menu block, and I can use twig tweak. I enabled that module already, and now I can override that block, and I'm going to use that Drupal block method. Here is the machine name of the site branding. So I'm going to rebuild cache. And now I see that it's being added there now.
technically, but not visually.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah.
It's really dumb. Yeah.
Dark blue on black.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay,
There it
but
is.
still, it
Thanks,
doesn't have the the theme to it. Let's see if we can make that a little bit better. Okay, so here's the problem, is that this site branding has its own theming going on. If I look here, we're actually like, here's Climbot branding. If you look here, it's using block system branding block. So if we wanted to override this and say we're actually going to use the Climbot branding, we come back over here, and or so just the branding block, because we probably use it in several other places. In our twig template here, we're calling in our components-site name, and we have a pattern here. And all this is just a simple link. It has the class that we need, and it's just dumping out the site name, which here we're offering, but Drupal is going to return that for us. So if we were to extend this pattern, we can actually do that. Well, we're actually going to include this pattern. Reason why we're going to include it is because we need the markup, and we're going to define the variables that the pattern uses. So when we drop this in here, so we're including that pattern. It already has our markup. I'm just piping in a home page path, and I'm piping in site name. Site name is, I guess, is already available to the block itself. So what do we have there? We're going to rebuild the cache. Now it's taken over. See how these pieces are kind of coming together? It's like bit by bit, you know?
Yeah, it's something that's definitely clear now that I didn't understand before, is that really you leave all the pattern lab components wherever you make them, and you tell the Drupal templates to go use those components.
Exactly.
Yeah. To me, in my mind, I just imagined before that you would generate Drupal templates with pattern lab, but it makes sense that this is the way it is.
Right. Yeah, your patterns are intended to be, they are the, I mean, I guess I'm kind of losing what I was going to say, but like the patterns right here. I mean, this is your site, and you want to just keep all of that the same layout, everything the same libraries. You just want to replace where data is being added. You just want to replace it with Drupal data. Okay, so real quick, we're gonna override our homepage article, which could be like a a hero. Or in this case, it's just a jumbotron for lack of better styling. So if I go back to our home pattern, we're already, because of our front page view, it's just dumping out articles. There's only one article here. It's really just so you can kind of get the picture here. So our template right here, article. We've got all these suggestions. I'm going to choose article teaser. So I came in here, I created that particular template. And if I uncomment this, but just like we did with the site branding, we're just including the hero template, and then we're going to define all the values that hero template is expecting. Now, typically this would be kind of hard to do, to some degree, but just writing out, being able to grab those field values. You'd be like digging into the arrays and starting from element into content, and etc. So with field value, twig field value, it allows you to yeah. So
Filter.
exactly. So what we have here is we have the content available to us. So we have content available to us. So if we looked at, say, here's content body. You've got a lot of different things down in here that you'd kind of have to filter through. But with twig field value, you can just basically say, you can target, I want to dump out the body, and I want to dump out the field value. So what we're doing is, for the hero title, we're passing in node.titleValue. I would have assumed that I could have done content.title and then pipe field value, but it wouldn't work.
Also labeling?
I guess maybe I was using the wrong term. Would it be content.label?
I'm trying to think. You're in the node template right now, right?
Yeah.
So the node title isn't a part of the content array in the node template.
Okay.
Because generally it's used as the page title in the page template. But I might be confusing some Drupal 7 stuff in here.
Well, the only way I could get it to work was node.title.value. But I got it working. Yeah. So, and then here, maybe you want to have things that are actually coming out of the database. I just put in, a couple things, like maybe there's a label field or, some sort of other thing. URL that's available to us top level. We're able to use that. I'm just piping in a Boolean here on the template itself, the pattern itself. It's looking for whether or not it's true, so it will render out this button. Maybe you might have a hero that doesn't have a button attached to it or URL attached to it. So when I included this template in, you already saw that Maybe another time too, we'll talk about other tools with Grunt. There's Drush tools. You can just, every time you save, it'll just issue a Drush cache rebuild, so you don't ever have to like type that out every time. I've used that in other projects, and it's worked really well. So now we're looking pretty close to what we have. I mean, this is pretty much, this is what we're after. You know, we're using our patterns. So now if we were to say, make an adjustment in our pattern, say we were to change H1 to say like H3, we've got our grunt cast running in our background here. It's compiling, and then it says it's done. I have to clear the cache, the Drupal cache. Now it is a 3. So the big point of this is like, this is so much easier to adjust from the pattern lab side than it is from the Drupal side. When you can create all your content and say like all of that stuff up front, you don't have to worry about building your content type and things like that. In a way, you almost like, you start to map it out, you know? And the thing is that how I see this being really useful for our team and for our you know, product owner is that they come to us and they have a particular feature. You know, we want a new page that showcases this. Okay, well, in Pattern Lab, I can just pull up that page. I can create a new page. I can pull in the patterns that I need, keep things consistent, whether it's buttons or you know, way that a video is handled or an image. And I could scaffold that really quick and then turn around and say, well, here you go. What do you think? You want to use this? And this actually, this could live.
Then when you make a change to that pattern, it changes for all the pages that are using that pattern.
Yes.
So if you refresh this, that should be in H3, right?
Style got changed. Yeah, makes sense.
And this lives. This is a living style guide, so you could see it as like themes include public. Oh, components, I was missing that. So, you know, you could send this to your client or, you know, your user, whoever, and this is where you could basically demo your stuff. So they could be able to come here, they can see homepage, be like, oh, cool, it's looking, you know, it's looking great. I like how I like how it's responsive. I like, you know, this particular functionality. And
to like people who create the content, who create images for certain spaces, to
Yeah.
know like what the dimensions are expected and
right,
how everything will flow.
if it works well. This is something I'm excited to use, you know, on that end, because we get requests all the time for like, we want a new feature, we want a new page that has some sort of special kind of coding to it. And before, it's like we would have to create a Drupal page. We'd have to do all the Drupal stuff up front, and that would take a long time. And then by the time we would get to them, they would say, well, we changed our mind. We don't really need that. Or You know, it's like, oh, well, great, thanks.
We want this instead.
We want this instead, or you know, or maybe it's evolved at that point because it took too long. You know, whereas you could just quickly here's what it's going to look like. They sign off on it, and then that's when you just make the connection between Drupal and your pattern. So, and that's it. I have a couple resources in here. Just a couple things. There's a new project that looks pretty interesting, and it's actually a module that connects to your pattern lab. You know, I guess it works with display suite or panels and allows you to maybe like drop in your patterns. Looks kind of interesting. I haven't gotten into here, but
What's that screenshot?
I don't know. It looks a little confusing.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, it might be some way of like, instead of having to do like, whereas, okay, I think what it is see how here we're having to override all these templates, these blocks. On the UI side, you could probably just say, no need to create the actual template file and extend it, and pipe your data in that way. There's probably a way to create that association on the UI side and then do your data mapping there without having to do all the templating.
I mean, that makes sense. The next step after this would be an editor on your website saying, well, I want to choose the components.
Right.
So why not make a UI for that?
Yeah, true. I mean, with this kind of instance, that's a good point. You're really only
You always have to make a template and choose the components from a developer perspective.
Right.
Cool.
So in a nutshell, that's pattern lab, and that's how we're using it. So this theme that I have here, I'll make available. It's really just, it's intended for anybody to use. So, and it is set up in a way that you would clone this down, literally run your grunt commands to get up and running, enable the theme, and we're good to go. So
very cool. Can you share the slides maybe?
For sure.
To the meetup, maybe to the meetup page.
I will do that.
Yeah, just put it in Slack and then we'll have a video for future use.
Okay. All right. No other questions? I think we don't have any more to talk about.
Any questions online?
You can chat them in the chat.
What's the delay? So the
All right, 8 minutes from now they'll get that.
We'll answer them tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. This room will be dark and their question will come through.
I think we're good. That's a good job.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.